It's my pleasure to be with you today. My name is Veronika Movchan, as you said, and I am Academic Director of the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting. It is a think tank in Ukraine, and our organization specializes on economic analysis and development of policy recommendations for the government. The book, Deepening European-Ukrainian Relations, is the handbook prepared in consortium with actually 4 organizations. The leader of consortium is CEPS, Center for European Policy Studies, a think tank in Brussels. And we have the Ukrainian team, which I represent, and we have also Georgian and Moldovan team. And actually we have now the set of 3 handbooks, each discussing the association agreement of the EU with the country, namely with Ukraine, with Georgia, and with Moldova. And the project was implemented due to financial support of the government of Sweden, SIDA. And the aim of these books actually to make the agreements much more understandable. The agreements are huge. It's for Ukraine, it's about 2,000 pages, which is fairly unreadable economic and legal text. And the goal of the handbook is first to condense it to the understandable to professionals and general public that likes to know that what the agreement means in specific terms, what is important to harmonize in terms of legislation, what may be delayed or postponed, and also describes this situation with implementation of these commitments as they were in the year 2016. Definitely the part of the book will be like history because the implementation progresses, but the description of the agreement and commitments remain relevant for years to come. The agreement is definitely not one time, 1 month or one night implementation. The transition period put itself in the agreement is 10 years, but a realistic assumption is it will take maybe up to 20 years to implement, because 10 years it is for legal approximation, but after you pass the law, you have to set all institutions and to ensure that they work efficiently. The longest implementation is expected for environmental commitments, which are very important, but in principle they are one of the most difficult to implement. Just a couple more words. Actually, currently the agreement, the association agreement, is implemented in provisionally. It means that although the agreement is implemented in most of its parts, some of the parts that are related to the national authority of the European Union countries is not implemented until all countries ratified. Actually, the only ratification we are currently waiting about is the ratification in the Netherlands. In 2016, they had referendum, which said actually no for ratification in the current status of the agreement. They now agreed on some reservations, and the ratification bill is resubmitted to the Netherlands Parliament, as far as I know, and we are now waiting for the decision for ratification. All other two other agreements, the Georgian and Moldovan agreements, are already ratified and are fully implemented. The positive news for Ukraine, that trade part of the agreement, so-called DCFTA, is already implemented. It is provisionally, but as most of trade and trade-related issues are the unique responsibility of the European Commission, the implementation of trade part was possible before all ratification. For Ukraine, the DCFTA implementation was postponed because we and European Union had more than a year of consultations with Russia to trying to meet the concerns of Russia regarding DCFTA. The consultation resulted in nothing because the concerns were not about the substance of agreement, but probably the existence of agreement as such. So no substantive concerns were identified. As a result, it was very difficult to tackle anything, and the agreement just went into force in January 2016 in its trade part, while the implementation of the rest actually started back in the end of 2014. So currently we have more than 2 years of the full implementation of non-trade parts and a year of implementation of trade parts of the agreement. Political parts, the agreement doesn't contain any laws to obey, but it stipulates fundamental principles of modern democratic state, definitely rule of law, democracy, respect to human rights, and these issues they create the fundamental value of the agreement, and if they are violated, actually agreement can be broken and can stop its implementation. So, and we have the so-called association agenda that stipulates some of the reforms that expected from Ukraine to ensure that it adhere to these political fundamentals. And Ukraine is gradually moving. It's not the very easy process, but one of the key things that I am sure now important both for political environment and for economy of Ukraine is a juridical reform. It was launched last year in the middle of 2016. The amendments to Constitution were passed to first, on the one hand, to increase the independence of judiciary branch of power, on the other hand, to increase its accountability and transparency. For example, currently, according to these new amendments to the Constitution, if the judge cannot explain the source of its wealth, it can be like withdrawn. It will stop be judge. Before it was no way to, or almost no way to prosecute the judges who misbehaved. So the reform started. It will take about 3 years to see real results. At least the plans are for 3 years to come. So I hope it will significantly change the situation in Ukraine, although it's definitely not easy. On the other hand, we have economic commitments. What was already done is mutual opening of the markets. It was a bit asymmetric. You open it very fast for most of the products. Actually, it did it already in April 2014, even before all agreements were implemented as a part of autonomous trade preferences, just to support the country. Then the Russian aggression started, so to support the economy of the country, you opened its market aligned with DCFTA commitments. So only now we have the further gradual reduction of remaining tariffs, but there are quite few of them that now remained. And Ukraine in 2016 started to open its market, not as fast as the EU, but also significantly. About 70% of tariff rates were removed last year, and now we are waiting for next 7 years for zeros for most of the products. Ukraine will keep non-zero tariffs for some agricultural products, and the EU will have so-called tariff rate quotas, that is also partial liberalization, zero tariffs within quotas, and usual tariffs outside for selected agricultural products. So both parties actually ready to protect some of its agriculture, and there are now discussions for maybe further liberalization, because agricultural and food sector are very strong in Ukraine and developing very aggressively, and definitely they are interested in much better access to the EU market for products that remained covered by these TRQs. But the challenge in economic part is definitely the harmonization of legislation, its standards. It's the idea to have dynamically equivalent or dynamically identical for industrial products, for some of industrial products, system of regulations, which will mean that they will be very similar to the common market, but it's the task for years to come. Also, already now the access to the EU market is quite good, so especially the challenge will be for agricultural producers and for food producers to ensure that all domestic firms follow the EU standards, because firms that are export now or they are going to export, they are adjusting very fast and they now implement the standards of the EU. But to supply the entire market with the products that are the same level of food safety than in the EU is absolutely different task. And we have another spheres where important changes will come. It's a competition policy. Also here it's more institutional changes. Legislation is largely in place, in line with international practices, but the task is to enforce it, because great legislation and high level of monopolization simultaneously is what we have now in Ukraine. Same refers to the protection of intellectual property rights. We do have quite good legislation, but the level of protection remains low, and it's important to change the culture of, of trust in property, in intellectual right property, which is sometimes also a question around the world with IT, how to protect it and whether we need such a strong level of protection, how to do it. But in any case, Ukraine committed to improve this sphere and to adhere European legislation in this sphere. And it especially concerns also the so-called geographic indications, which EU tend to protect, like wines, various wines, like champagne, like some cheeses, feta, roquefort, some of the hams. And Ukraine committed to implement the European level of protection of geographic indications in 5-10 years, because currently Ukraine tends to produce its own champagne or its own feta, and the producers have to rebrand. What else? We have a lot of sectoral also commitments. It's cooperation and harmonization related to energy policy, to transport policy, to agricultural issues, environment, as I said. It's a huge number of different legislation to implement, and definitely the capacity of the government and the parliament to implement everything without delays, I would say, is low. So it's important to prioritize what is the most important changes to take first, and then gradually move further on further details. The calculations that my institute did, and generally most of the calculations did by independent researchers around the world, part of Russia, they show that the agreement should have positive impact. The smallest but quickest is a positive impact due to elimination of tariffs, but taking into account that the level of tariffs was not huge, the impact is also small. For example, Ukrainian average tariff around for all countries in the WTO that have no preferential trade with Ukraine, the average tariff is 4%. It's absolutely clear that it's not the game changer. What is more important is the elimination of non-tariff barriers, the reform of customs services, which I didn't mention yet. It is the issue of trade facilitation, that automatic uses of customs procedure, a lot of electronic documentation, single windows, same classifications, etc., to ensure that the border is not a physical barrier, because the estimates can count that 10% or more of costs come from these border controls. It's not the tariff, that's tax, but it's just the losses of time and energy to fulfill all controls. This will be simplified, which is very important. And also, as I said, harmonization of standards will also help to smooth trade. Plus, actually, these trade facilitation issues will benefit Ukraine not only in trade with European Union. We have other benefits in trade with other countries, because everybody has to cross the border if they want to trade. And also harmonization of standards is important, because a lot of countries around the world recognize European standards as provide a high level of safety, food safety or industrial product safety, and it means that the entering this market will give positive gains. It's related to trade gains that can be measured, and according to the estimates done by the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting, which I represent, it's CGE calculations, computable general equilibrium calculations, the long-term gains from this removal of administrative barriers and non-tariff barriers can be about 12% of GDP, in addition to the current trajectory. It's without technological changes, without changes in business environment, without additional external investments. But what Ukraine actually expects is much faster growth due to changes in the business climate, making it much more predictable, establishment of rule of law that makes the country much more attractive for investors, domestic or especially foreign, which would bring modernization to the economy and will jumpstart the growth to much higher level. Because according to the current estimates, after almost 4 years of decline and very deep decline 2 years ago, in 2016 we had 2% growth in real GDP, which is good, but actually way too low for Ukraine. Ukraine needs much faster growth given the deepness of the previous shocks, and actually they need to progress. So I hope that these, I estimate, or my analysis shows that the changes in the business climate can at least double or triple growth rates. That can be very positive sign for the economy. Although it's a combination of so many factors. The association agreement is a great positive stimulus, but we have negative stimulus like war. We have external prices. We have external situation. If, for example, we are ready to trade, but nobody ready to buy because the world is getting much more protectionist, it's also a problem. So it's the association agreement is the positive sign macroeconomically, but it will be definitely affected in different ways, and we'll see what will be the eventual result. I just wanted to say that also it's important to understand that the changes will be unequal between sectors and also unequal between households, because these sectors which are expected to gain the most from trade liberalization is agriculture, is food industry, is the light industry, which are very highly protected in the European Union. De facto. Light textile, sorry. It's it's a bad translation. So it is these sectors that are more consumer-oriented that European Union has high tariff barriers and also food safety barriers here. The rest didn't get such a trade impetus, but they will benefit from the business environment changes and investment changes. And we'll see how it develops. Currently, the two fastest growing products to the exports to the EU is the sunflower oil, which is, Why? Okay, so it's growing very fast. And the second category is the electronic equipment for automotive industry. Germany built a couple of factories, some of them quite a long time ago, but now a couple new. Japan followed, and there is a cluster of suppliers of automotive parts to the European Union in the Western Ukraine. But I think that there is much more possibilities for building now factories in Ukraine to putting country into these production value chains. Ukraine, due to all the crisis that we have very low wage compared to the international standards, and we have qualified, educated labor force, very good logistics. So it's a very lucrative opportunity now for investors, and what we observe here, it's already happening. A lot of them are still waiting to see some of the end of the reforms, although most adventures are coming. And also we have very fast development of IT sector. The association agreement will stimulate that because actually it also envisages some harmonization of legislation and creation of something like common market here for digital economy. So, and the IT is one of the sectors that boosted disregarding all domestic policies. It doesn't need a lot of investments apart of human capital, and the human capital is what Ukraine has now, disregarding all physical problems with infrastructure. Yes, it's also labor standards will increase gradually, and in principle it's interesting, a lot of issues are already covered by Ukrainian legislation. The issue is how to enforce it effectively. And then I'm asked whether any sector will disappear due to agreement. I said that I found one, not that the whole sector, not the one enterprise, the whole sector will disappear, is actually production of products related to asbestos, because it's cancer generating and it's prohibited in the EU. Yeah, but it's still in Ukraine, and that will definitely go out. The rest, there will be more competition, more stimulus to be efficient, not in competition for policy rents, but a competition for consumer, for better products, quality, etc. One issue that bothers me, I don't know how technical it is that a lot of people say that agreement introduces quantitative barriers because they hear word quota. They miss first two words, that is a tariff rate quota, so it's no quantitative prohibition to export, for example, more to European Union. It is actually partial liberalization. That means that if you export some volume, it's duty-free. If you export more, you have to pay tariffs, as it was before. So not higher tariffs, not something new. So it's for over quota volumes, you have to just follow the tariff rules that was used before. And a lot of people just speculate saying, okay, you close the market for agricultural products, although it didn't open it fully, but it opened it to a certain extent. And the second one is that the people are saying that, okay, we don't see now huge growth rate in trade between Ukraine and the EU. According to National Bank of Ukraine, there's a preliminary data. We have about 2% growth of Ukrainian exports to EU, and 5% decline in total Ukrainian exports growth to the whole world. So EU is actually one only, and Canada, one of very few partners with which export is growing. And people say it's DCFTA given is nothing, although they forget about, for example, international prices, global commodity prices, the economic situation in the countries that receive the Ukrainian products, and also the economic situation domestically, because if we have industrial production growing only 2%, it's quite questionable what we can export if we are not producing. So it is sometimes the people try to use the current statistics result analysis to say that it gave nothing, although it's not true, and it should be clearly understood. Thank you for interviewing me. I'm happy that you noticed in Canada this book, that you want to introduce the book Deepening Ukrainian-EU relations to the wider audience, because the goal was to show that the agreement is actually important, that it changes the whole world, economic world in Ukraine, and not only economic, the political world, and it brings Ukraine much closer to the EU, and it's a positive thing. So thank you for sharing our products. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.